Really happy to be here. Really thanks for him letting me actually stand up here and talk to you without somebody pulling me off. But I did speak in a class before with Richard, and it was really cool to see how many similar things are going on, not only on academic level, but also on the business side. I'm not from Stanford, but definitely have a lot of background working with people from Stanford, and as well as in my business doing venture right now, as well as in Google before. So just a little bit more about me as to what Richard was saying. I started my business, my career actually in banking in the early, mid-90s or so, and then moved to startup world end of the 90s or so, and then moved out to the Bay Area in 2000, where I started at Google. And at that time, international was more of a luxury for a company. It wasn't really a main part of the business. And then about 6 months into the job, they said, can you help us, monetize search overseas and start, looking at ways to expand. And it was sort of a side project, but then we saw there was so much traffic coming in from overseas areas, and as the internet was growing, the index was growing, and more and more searches were being done overseas. And then I moved my focus more to Asia, and of course at the time with Silicon Valley companies, Asia was a very risky area. I mean, China obviously with its walled gardens, and then in Korea, the operators and the conglomerates were kind of running everything. But over time, search became more of a main business unit for people, for companies over there, and began to grow Google's presence over time, and kept those relationships. And then afterwards, coming back to the Valley, started seeing a lot of entrepreneurs that wanted to leverage my experience in Asia with different countries there that I'd been doing business in, and with their own business. And now with mobile exploding everywhere, it's become sort of the main, in some cases, the first stage of their business going to Asia first, because mobile is very much everywhere there, especially Android. And also the other way, so we see a lot of Asian money and entrepreneurs wanting to come to the Valley because that's considered the gold standard of where to launch your business. So through these networks, both here and in Asia, I've been sort of bridging that and working closely with Professor Dasher as well. He's been a big help. And without further ado, I guess we will point it over to Sherman, and afterwards have a quick talk about both of our experiences and open it up to you for a Q&A.
Great. Thanks, David. All right. I think my story is a little bit different, and let me get this back up onto the screen. I'm Sherman Lee, and as Dr. Dasher mentioned, I actually grew up in America, and I'm going to kind of start a little bit about why I'm an outsider to Korea and how I ended up going there. Okay, these prezzies are sometimes too cool. All right. Why it's a little different, I'm actually Chinese American, I'm not Korean, and I ended up in Korea for the last 10 years. I graduated here in 2003. I was a computer systems engineering major. They got rid of it already. And I didn't stay here. I'm, I think, the only guy in my class who doesn't work for David at Google at that time. And so when I came out of college, I started my first company directly in Korea, and we sold it in 2005. The company's called Vixar. After that, I returned into the Bay Area, did some consulting, and then I was invited back to Korea with SoftBank Ventures Korea in 2008. And I was an entrepreneur in residence there and became the CEO and CFO of Enswers, my second startup, which was acquired at the end of 2011. So currently, I have a couple roles. I run the US subsidiary of Enswers, which is now a Korea Telecom subsidiary, and also Soompi.com, which is their K-pop site. They call it Hallyu, which is Korean wave site, and we're all over the world. We have French versions, Portuguese versions, and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of my background, and I'm kind of going to go through all these things and how I ended up in this career path. The questions I'm always asked, as the Chinese guy in Korea trying to do startups, is how did I become an entrepreneur, and why Korea? I mean, the story in China and Japan, it's such a strong story in Southeast Asia, in India. But out of all places 10 years ago, why Korea? Now it's easy to see. There's all this technology in Korea. You guys, the best phones are coming out of there, the best consumer electronics. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. And then how is entrepreneurship in Asia different? Like, why didn't I stay here in the Silicon Valley? And a lot of times, how can we do that? How can you go through that journey of starting a company in Asia after being trained here and learning the perspective of the local industries? Okay, so my first startup in Korea, Vixar, this is kind of what happened. As Dr. Dasher mentioned, through 2000 and 2002, I was involved in the Asia Pacific Student Entrepreneurship Society. Now, ACES, it's still alive now, which I'm very happy to say. A couple of members are here. And ACES is really a student organization. We've kept it completely student-run, and they organize 2 conferences a year, one at Stanford for an entire week, and another in Asia. And students from universities in Japan and Hong Kong and Singapore, they all come to Stanford, and then students here all go over to Asia to meet each other and talk shop or learn about each other's experiences in college. Now, by doing that, of course, you meet a lot of people that you didn't think you'd meet. And one of the members there was studying at KAIST, which is the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. And a lot of, I believe Professor Terman was an early member of KAIST's establishment in Korea. And he reached out to us with an idea to basically build GoToMyPC, which is something you guys, it was founded also around the same time in America, and WebEx and at that time is very exciting. So he reached out to me and all of the ACES friends and said, well, why don't you come join me? And I was like, well, maybe I want to go to another big company here. Maybe I should stay in Silicon Valley. And then we won a business plan competition. We got free incubator space in the university. We're like, all right, let's do this. So I graduated. Day after I graduated, I went to Korea. And KAIST is actually not in Seoul. It's 2 hours south of Seoul in a town called Daejeon. They've tried to make it into an industrial park. There's a lot of government funding there. The university was established in the model of Stanford. And again, they really try to nurture this. And at the time, we got some very small seed funding and started our company. Let's see. Okay. From there, we actually formed a small team of 8 students and engineers around this one patent and one idea to build remote control. And remote control and GoToMyPC, again, is controlling a computer over the internet. And of course, we had to make it a web-based solution, so it's not like VNC and those kind of Linux-based solutions. We didn't pay ourselves very much out of the initial funding, just enough to afford some ramen and live in the town next door. Again, my first apartment in Korea was $250 a month. The running water didn't run so well, and a lot of those kind of things. But it was a lot of fun, and I think the only time in my life I could do that was when I was 23. So that was a good choice, I think, at the time. That being said, we still ran out of money. And we spent 6 months pitching to strategic VCs. At the time, there weren't a lot of angels, right? There's a lot of VCs that are attached to big companies. There's Samsung Ventures, there's SK Ventures, there's those kind of companies. There's a lot of investment arms at banks. So we went to all the big banks in Korea. So this is like KB Bank or Uri Bank. And then, of course, we tried to call everyone who could be interested and had money to write us a check. We actually signed a term sheet after 6 months. We celebrated. Then the deal fell through and they said, I don't know if we want to invest in a bunch of kids. So then we ran out of money by January of 2004. And we actually took out bank loans, private loans, and we became really desperate. I mean, you got to imagine we're 8 kids, we didn't know what to do, and no one wants to give us money. So one of the VC firms, a firm called Serum Ventures, and it's actually, they invested early on Dialpad. I don't know if you guys remember the name, that sold to Yahoo. So that group actually, they're like, okay, we're going to invest in your company but at a very low valuation. And SoftBank Ventures later joined. Again, there's a lot of parts of this deal structure that we didn't know about. I mean, we were too young to understand it. We had some of the angel round, but again, part of it was in corporate bonds, the way it converted. We just didn't understand enough of it to really know how it all worked. And that kind of ended up being a problem for us later on. But anyway, we took the money because we had no choice, and we created that GoToMyPC type service in Korea. We called it Net2Ro, and it was a freemium model. It became #1 in users very quickly, but wasn't profitable for us because no one was upgrading to the premium accounts. And this is like in 2003 in Korea, no one wants to pay for it. So we were like, well, we need a big name. We cut a deal with one of the telecom providers, and we reached kind of a revenue share agreement with LG's Daycom, which is their telecom arm at the time, and we tried to sell a remote support solution. Even with LG Daycom and that deal, we still failed to become profitable. It's, freemium at the time was very new. Paying for it when you could get most of what you need for free was very hard to accomplish. And one more wrinkle. After 2 years, our entire team had to go to the Korean military. So this was something we didn't anticipate, because when we started the company, most of the kids are still students. Now, while you're a student in Korea, you're covered. You don't have to go to the military. But they thought that as long as they kind of did some classes, they can be covered. By 2005, everyone got a slip. You can't get out of it. One of the guys actually served in Iraq. Anyway, everyone had to go to the military. Out of the 8 people on our team, it was just myself who didn't have to go, and a female designer. So we're like, well, what are we going to do? We can still survive. We're not doing great, and everyone has to go to the military. So we decided to close up shop. And so after 2.5 years of running this company, we actually sold it to LG and their unit. And actually, to date, it's still the #1 service of its kind in Korea, which is why you don't go to Korea and someone's using Go to My PC, right? But it's never really became such a big hit there, and we wrapped up our business. Now, of course, when we sold the company, all the money plus interest went back to our investors. Again, we also didn't know it was better to declare bankruptcy. We might get something out. Again, we didn't know how this all worked. So our investors liked us a lot from that. But I also learned a lot of lessons from those 2.5 years, even though I didn't get as much financially out of it. Don't take bank or private loans if you have a choice. It's tough, and you're sweating a lot when you do that. It was really important, I think, choosing the VCs wisely. Like at the time, we were impressed by some names. By the way, Serum Ventures approached us because they had funded Dialpad. But there are horror stories, and we kind of lived through some of it. And why I say that is that by the time we're wrapping up the company, we get offers of, well, you guys, we didn't return much money to us. You have to work for us. You're liable to work for us for years. All those kinds of things. It's for real. They asked me to do that, and I almost signed a contract. Said, hey, don't worry about the loan. You're going to have to work the next 5 years to pay it off, and they're going to take off a certain amount from your salary. I was staring at this contract, going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do, right? Do I have to? Again, ask your lawyers. Make sure you do all these things properly, and really choose your VCs wisely. If they're the kind of people who need to squeeze you for every dime, that's a really bad way to run a business. The other part is don't celebrate after signing LOIs or term sheets. That stuff. Yeah, we went out and got a bottle of whiskey. We're like, yes, we did it. And then they pulled it, right? So one of the banks that we talked to pulled it. Our valuation that we actually ended up taking months later was 1/3 of what we thought we would get. Same for the dollar amount. Fourth, obviously, be aware of the Korean military requirement. I didn't know that going in, that all the guys I was working for needed to go at some point. I didn't know that. And also, business models should be chosen differently. Freemium at the time for this kind of productivity type service wasn't a good choice for us. Freemium in Korea is really powerful for the gaming industry. I think for enterprise, it wasn't very great. We'll talk about this more later, but I think that the way you choose a business model in Korea when you're trying to do this is very different. Okay, so that's kind of my first thing. So after I ended up back at home, and Zuckerberg, by the way, is class of 2003, and I realized I was not him. So I went home to San Francisco, and all my buddies were at Facebook or Google, and I had to go be a consultant for a firm. I had actually learned enough from my time in Korea, so I did some strategy consulting, especially about internationally, mainly working with Intel, actually. At the time, they were very excited about media PCs and the Intel Vive. I don't know if you guys remember that. And I did a lot of work there. 2 to 3 years of building PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets. I got a little bit bored after the exciting 2.5 years I had it in Korea. However, it was really nice to have a paycheck. So I didn't know what to do with my career. And by this time, I was 5-6 years out of college. It's a good time to go to business school, potentially go to a consulting firm like the offers I had rejected when I was coming out of school. And that's not my Dropbox. I had offers to join one of the clients I was working with, big firm. Should I work for a startup at that time? or join a cool company like Google. I guess after a couple years being back here, the pace is different, and I really wanted to be back in Asia. Not because it's necessarily better for my career, it's just because it was more interesting. So, as luck would have it, someone I'd kind of known, and again, someone else from KAIS, he founded a company in 2007 by winning a research grant from the Korean government. And at this time, I actually returned to Korea. And I was an entrepreneur in residence for SoftBank Ventures. And because SoftBank had invested in our first company, the CEO invited me back. He said, I want to be part of your next company. You're old enough now, and you might be a little bit wiser than the first time. So I want to put money again. But I actually did that only for about 4 or 5 months before I met up with Jack, who started Enswers. And we put the company together. He had just won a research grant. We actually put together the first round of funding, the Series A. We had angel financing from Bone Angels, and I joined as a founding member. And by middle of 2008, again, we had brought in money, we had put together the team, we started growing our business. Now, why it's called Answers, it's entertainment answers. We started as a video search engine, and we really thought we were going to become the Google for video search. The strength of our company is technology called video fingerprinting. If you're familiar with the space, there's watermarking, fingerprinting, and what it's called now is content recognition or automatic content recognition. It's a very new space, actually. Up until last year, no one even knew what that meant. And now it's actually becoming something where you're going to find trade shows and so forth. So it's called ACR. There's a lot of companies in this space. But in the beginning, we tried to do video search. Again, video search wasn't so great because YouTube had 80% of all the videos. So there's no reason to use anything but YouTube search. We quickly figured out that no one was using it. And that kind of technology, video fingerprint technology, first found buyers, content owners, broadcasters. It became anti-piracy. So we actually pivoted very quickly to anti-piracy for short-term revenue. And we started being one of the best companies in Asia, and we worked with the MPA. There's actually, and you guys probably don't know this, but the content owners run something called Movie Labs, and the MPA runs Movie Labs, and they actually work on this kind of technology just to prevent you from downloading illegal files on the internet. And of course, at the time, Korea is one of these hotbeds. I don't know if you know about Mega Upload, and Kim.com. Hundreds of these sites exist in Korea, and they're making money. That's the difference. BitTorrent, no one's making money out of it. These sites that are kind of web storage-based solutions, someone actually makes money. People pay for a subscription. They pay to download. So we actually start filtering hundreds of these solutions, and we evolved to a video distribution platform in 2009. We actually became profitable from doing that, from anti-piracy and so forth in 2010. We raised a Series B from KT Capital, Stonebridge Ventures, and SoftBank Ventures. And we grew very quickly. When ACR became something, our technologies matured and scalable because of anti-piracy. And today, anything you call second screen experiences or first screen experiences, you guys probably have Shazam on your phone or SoundHound, and that's exactly what ACR means. You can listen, that's what Shazam does. It listens to any audio feed and compares it to the actual music files, and it figures out what you're listening to. What we're talking about with first screen is you can have technology like that for video. It can see what you're watching and figure out what it does. And now this kind of technology is being embedded into your phone, into your television, so that your device is content aware. I mean, that's what we're calling it. And so by concept, it's similar to what a GPS chip does for your phone or for your device. It lets your phone know where you are. Content recognition lets your device know what you're listening to or what you're watching. So it's a very new concept, something maybe it's first time, and so we're expanding everywhere. So in Korea, the #1 Shazam type app is powered by our solution. In Japan, we work with, we do work with Dentsu, again, white labeling our solution so that advertising campaigns, say you are watching the Olympics and Coca-Cola wants to advertise, well, you download an app, you click in, I'm watching fencing right now, you get some points. We powered apps like that, and campaigns like that throughout Korea and Japan. And in the US, we are now working on the same kind of second screen experiences along with the television work that we're doing in ACR. So that's what Enswers does. And because of this vision and the growth of this market, well, I don't know why that just did that. At the end of 2011, we actually were acquired by Korea Telecom, and SoftBank, being the original investor in the company, remained as a minority shareholder. And it's kind of working as a JV right now, even though KT owns most of the shares. And that's kind of where I came back. And when we were negotiating the acquisition, I said, it's been a long time since I've been home. Let me open an office in the US to do the business I'm working on, which is why I'm here today. And I'm running the subsidiary out here in America, as well as the K-pop subsidiary that we run. So that's the last 10 years. 2 startups and a little bit of consulting in between. And I wanted to end with a few thoughts from my perspective as someone who wasn't Korean doing startups in Korea. Especially 10 years ago, I strongly felt the starting point was the Korean government. And it's easy here in the Silicon Valley to say governments in Asia or around the world funding these universities, these digital parks, that it doesn't work. I think it helps a lot. It's the first round of funding you're going to get. There's a process to do it. You just apply. There's no strings attached. Why not? The government's not going to take shares of your company. You're going to get 100,000, maybe a little bit more, just for writing an idea down, maybe some technology. So I think that's a really wonderful starting point. Here, of course, you have the seed investors, angel investors. In Asia, still, the government gives a lot of help to young startups. The second thing is going to Korea. That was interesting to me. Korean business really has its own rules, or Asian business in general, but I really believe that people kind of lump Asia all into one group. Korea is very different from Japan, from China, from Singapore, from the rest of Southeast Asia. And 10 years ago when we were doing this and we were very young, it's actually very difficult to be young and starting a company because you're breaking a lot of barriers there. There's a hierarchy of age, there's a hierarchy of titles. It's built into the language that there's several layers of respect in the way you speak. You have to learn all of those things. You have to learn to bow, and it's not, again, there's some good things about being an entrepreneur. I think ignoring this is a problem. Learning about the working culture is different. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have talked about stories of everyone working really late, say in Japan. In Korea, there's kind of a frantic working style. And it's not so much staying late, actually. What I feel about Korean working culture is always available. Like, I feel like you're always available to the people you work with. You're always available to your clients. You're always available to your investors. That means that there is no time in your day that you shouldn't be able to be reached. And that's very unique to being in Korea, I feel like. When you go to Japan, people might be working late, but the subways are done by 10 p.m., whenever that is there. In Korea, at any time, someone could call and you just hop in a cab and be right there. They expect that. The other thing with negotiation in Korea, it's a little bit different. I think David will give a different perspective on this. In negotiation, a lot of times people say that in Asia, you negotiate and well, when does it begin? I feel like in Korea, getting to the handshake means that, okay, now we can start talking about how to do business, rather than it's the end of the deal. And I think that's an important thing to remember. So we'll talk about this more as we go, but I definitely felt there's some differences in the way Koreans approach business and how it's supposed to be done. The third thing is the chaebol influence. Chaebols are the large companies in Korea, the mega companies that run everything. Samsung and LG in America and Europe is a consumer electronics company. In Korea, that's not the case. You can buy Samsung consumer electronics like fridges and phones and stuff, but you can get an apartment, you can get your life insurance from them, you can buy a car. Everything in your life can actually be Samsung. And the banks there, the part of Samsung family, another brother or sister runs the entertainment company, someone else runs the malls that you go to, and then the mart that you go to, the Walmart that you go to. So it's very powerful there. For startups, what that means that the approach to strategic investments is very different. As if you take money from Samsung, you're not going to get bought by LG, right? You take money from certain strategic investors, they expect very different things from you than you would get here. Technology deals with the big companies, a lot of companies I've talked to, have worked with, been part of investing in, they end up becoming just a development shop. A lot of companies in Korea end up like that. You'll start a company, you have great technology, you sign a deal, and you basically signed over your company. And for the next 5 years, you're just building technology like that. So it's definitely something to be aware of, starting a company in Korea. The fourth point is that the venture ecosystem is very, very young, and it's very different 10 years ago from now. And again, angels didn't really exist that much 10 years ago. They're starting now. There's a few sources of seed and angel financing other than the government. There are steps along the chain. You can get a few $1 million from some VCs, and then you can potentially exit. But again, this is all very new. And the fifth thing is that you have to maximize the advantages of being in Korea, and whatever that is, engineering talent, the way people consume. Again, a lot of these cool payment models were created in Korea. The freemium gaming model, I mean, I keep on going back to gaming, is very interesting. And even the industry we were in for anti-piracy on the web storage, they innovated that years before anyone else did, before Mega Upload was around. I mean, it's a $1 billion business in Korea when we were doing it. I mean, $1 billion worth of illegal downloads. And that's not calculating how much the downloads are worth. That's actually how much money was exchanging hands over that from consumers to these companies. So I think those are kind of the thoughts on entrepreneurship in Korea. And I want to leave here with 5 more thoughts on going from Silicon Valley to Asia. Personally, I found Korea amazing. Last 10 years have been just all growth. From buildings that were there, the way the working culture is, and the technology development. It's been a privilege to be living in Korea. I feel like a lot of people, now it's the theme, you go to Asia, there's huge opportunity, it's awesome. It's true, wherever there's change, there's opportunity, but I don't necessarily think that it's better for startups. I mean, a lot of people say it's just better, go do it. Silicon Valley is still the best machinery. I mean, there's more talent here, funding, you can exit large, nice weather. And then if you decide, personally to go to Asia to run a startup, one of the most important things in Korea and in Asia in general is, again, learn the language. It's important, and try not to be too ignorant. And the effort matters. The effort of trying to learn matters a lot. And then don't make the mistake of thinking Korea or Japan are the same, or China or Hong Kong. Any of these countries are the same. Everywhere is different. You've got to learn where you're going to be. So that's really my thoughts, and that's everything I wanted to talk about today before we talk about what's happening now and what will happen in the next 10 years with David and his perspective. All right, thank you.
Thanks. You could stay there. Thanks for the great presentation. I take notes with my phone. I'm not checking email, just in case you're wondering. So I think one interesting point that he made, and I'll sit here while we have a mock fireside chat, is kind of the rarity of how many entrepreneurs that are not Korean can actually make it there. Because I know there's one other guy, Daniel Shin, you might know him. He was the founder of Ticket Monster. He's Korean American, but he went there, I think 3 or 4 years ago, did sort of a Groupon clone and sold it for like 400 million within like a year and a half, sold it to Living Social. And so I think a lot of guys followed, like the Samra brothers from Germany built a clone shop out there. People started to do this similar thing, but I think aside from the cloning, wave, you see some innovation actually going there, but a lot of people that were educated here, learning best practices and going there. Did you sort of see that as a first wave as well, or do you think it's just that sort of time frame when it was happening? And do you see more sort of originality coming out of Korea?
I think what you're saying, that trend is very important. The fact that the available opportunities and the incentives that go back to Korea are now there. It's a career option for people. Before it wasn't. If you're educated here, you should stay here because your life is better, and that's what your parents told you. Going back to Korea now is a viable option, in fact, a lucrative one for some people. And I think that's an important trend. will that keep it running over the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? I think it will. So you're going to be able to bring talent back into Korea. And when I talk to people like Daniel, like, why did you do it? Why did you come back and instead of join Groupon, start your own clothing? It's like, there's a big opportunity, there's a big chance. And I would say 10 years ago, that wasn't such a great chance, whereas now it is for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and I think ironically, a lot of entrepreneurs there, they all want to come here. They all think this is, the end all and its biggest market. And in many cases, we have to coach them out of coming here because they're really, they're more successful in their own backyard, focus on that. And I think just there's a big culture learning curve of them when they come over here, just the way that Silicon Valley is run and, the very high standards in many ways, but also just the language, small things like that. Which brings me to the point about ecosystems. So I know one thing that I see very apparent with startups here, but then you look at ones in China, Korea, is that everyone here, it's like being in Detroit. Everyone's in the same industry. Everyone's supporting each other in tech. So it's a lot, I think in that sense, much easier to succeed as an entrepreneur here, being that you're on the ground. In Korea, there's lots of fragmentation. Startups are still seen as very risky. If you're an entrepreneur, it's hard to get married because they think you're not working at Samsung, and to your point earlier. What do you think is missing there from the point of eco? You talked a little bit about it, and I see some as well, and I'll mention some after you give your comments.
I just think it takes time, and the ecosystem needs to develop. It's self-perpetuating. What's happening now is that why it's small is because a lot of the early VCs, now they're starting their own firms and able to raise from LPs. So a lot of people I worked with at, say, SoftBank, now they were associates then, now they're the partners at their firms or the founding members. So it just takes time for entrepreneurs to grow out, for the VCs to grow out, and for more people like yourself actually raising funds, the people capable of raising money and having the credibility to invest in that ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So again, it's 10 years ago this wasn't available. Now it is. It's starting to be, and even though it's small, it's great to see incubators happening and funds that come along with mentorship and advice as well.
Yeah, I mean the investors I would say are pretty savvy there. They're not going to invest in something they know will fail, and I think in terms of innovation, they don't really think of it that way. Think of more, what's my return going to be, especially when it's more of the angel level, early stage guy. I think more strategic investors will think about what are we getting out of the valley, what are we learning. But definitely, I think once there's more of that trust with early stage, it'll happen more, and definitely with government getting involved. Which is my next topic. I see pros and cons, and I know you said it was good, and with the new president in Korea, she's really pushing for small medium businesses to go global, for each government agency to have a budget to go towards startup companies, which I think is good because everyone thinks that hey, it's going to be supported from the beginning. But I think the bad part of it is that no one's vetting the deals like an investor would, and that creates, I think, a lot of zombie companies once they get that funding from the government, and then they run out of money within like 6 months to a year. They go to an investor, and he's like, you guys should have never been born. I mean, your business model is not right, and all these stuff that's sort of missing from sort of baseline startup companies, right? So, have you seen that to be the case, or do you think that that in itself will just wash out over time and things will be okay?
I think it's a difference in perspective. I mean, free money is great from the entrepreneur's perspective. From a macro perspective of is it good for the ecosystem? I don't know, right? I don't know the answer. It's a policy question, whether or not that actually encourages. But again, all the startups I've done have been born out of government funding, right? So that's why I look at it positively. I have seen a lot of terrible companies come out of it, but then again, I've seen a lot of terrible companies come out of private funding as well. So
right, yeah.
It's a policy question. I would say that in Korea's case, it has been effective largely because a lot of these zombie companies may not be innovative, but they create development strength and engineering strength that, like I said, become zombie companies developing technology for the bigger companies. Yeah. And it's an interesting dynamic going there, but that is what I see is happening.
And obviously with the right people like you in those companies, can do the best thing with the money. I know there's some other guys who, they have certain requirements from the government that they have to spend the money on surplus stuff, like, buy, vegetable oil. And it's a tech company, and they've got all these bottles of vegetable oil in the back they have to buy from the government. Right. So I know these are little loopholes and little interesting things, but I think it's like, the tide rises for everybody. With our accelerator, Kstartup, initially it was government funded, but then we broke out of that and we got money from Google and one other conglomerate in Korea. And basically they said, just run it on your own. You guys do what you have to do. And that was the best path for us. But I think with a lot of startups initially, getting to the programs that are, have fewer availability and investors who are more or less savvy, I would say, having money from government is a good sort of way to kickstart that. And definitely, if you could talk to them about that more over there, I think it would help get the fear out of people, and especially with startups that are coming from that side of the fence. So in terms of financing, and let's talk a little bit about your view. I mean, I'm curious to hear, because I know in the early days with entrepreneurs that, very draconian terms, if you lose the money, you have to pay it back personally. They could take your house. I've heard those kind of stories. And it sounded sort of like that with you. I'm seeing this slow shift toward more normal-looking term sheets where it's more of a, convertible note like you'd see in the Valley. Are you seeing that shift as well? And what do you think of, from the viewpoint of where entrepreneurs are in Korea and, ones that are making it over there? How do you view that dichotomy going on?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a huge progression in the term sheets and the deals that I've taken. My first one 10 years ago was written in Korean, and it was terrible. Basically, me and the other founder was personally liable. The reason we got out of it was I made a very good decision early on, and I asked it to be written in English because I wasn't a native Korean speaker. Because of that, actually, a lot of terms were gone, and I had it reviewed. So, again, when I was looking at the Korean sheet I didn't sign, it was one of the worst things ever, right, for an entrepreneur. By the second time, there's certain VCs now that are like real VCs, like again, SoftBank, Venture, Stonebridge. There's new VCs at that stage that can give you that 1 to 5 million target range for your Series A, and their terms are much better. But even 5 years ago, when I took money from SoftBank and Stonebridge and so forth, some of the terms were not quite as nice as they were here, and because we were doing our second startup and I was part of SoftBank, we got out of it. But again, the way ratchets work, little details that they won't tell you, and the way some of the bonds would convert if you took that route. It was definitely not as nice as it is here at this point. But again, it takes a lot of time because it takes a lot of entrepreneurs to fight those terms, and a lot of companies to have learn from that mistake before the entrepreneurs start pushing back on those terms. I think Korea is getting to that point where there's an inflection point where the VCs understand that it's better not to handcuff all the entrepreneurs and let them be safe in taking their money.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think the more that they meet with other entrepreneurs from the Valley that are used to different practices, they want those same terms, because it promotes more free thinking and able to just work on your startup without worrying about I have to pay somebody back. And to the point of that, I mean, with our accelerator, we definitely promote community. So we bring like mentors and advisors from the U.S. Who are entrepreneurs over to Korea to meet with them, and mainly not to teach them what to do, but to just share their thoughts. I think entrepreneurs love meeting each other. They have the same kind of problems, and because of that, I'm seeing this change in thinking where people think it's not just a Western thing; it's really a global thing, being an entrepreneur. And while you were in Korea, because I know it's very, insular in the sense of culture. I mean, how were you able to, being that you're not Korean, and I think I asked earlier, how are you able to keep sort of your way of doing things? And I found sometimes that when you don't speak Korean to them, it actually makes business a little easier because you take all the formalities out. Was that the same case for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt while I was there was some novelty factor in like, why are you here? And I think that helps a lot. I believe that I tried a lot in the way I learned the language, the customs. I mean, there's going out to company dinners. I've been back working here for 6 months in our subsidiary, and I haven't really gone out for more than a beer. In Korea, you're expected to stay out all night, karaoke with your team members, things like that. And especially with dealing with your investors or more the elderly managers that you will see, you have to treat everyone with a certain amount of respect, even if they don't understand what you're trying to do. And by doing that and showing the effort of doing that, I think that helps a lot in Korea. And I would say Asia in general, but Korea, it's very important. So for me to get in that structure, it's it's like, wow, he's really willing to learn the language, try everything, and try all the different foods, live octopus. So you're willing to have an open mind going there. It's going to help.
Did you have to drink a lot when you were there?
Yeah, I'm familiar with all different types of soju. Yeah.
I think that's one requirement for people. And the final thing I wanted to talk about was more of like content. I know that's from a content perspective in Korea, Hallyu, the Korean wave, be it K-pop and dramas. When I visited Taiwan, Japan, China, I noticed the influence there already. It was really interesting, and you couldn't deny it, but definitely it's something that Korea has to recognize as a big byproduct of an export they have, right? You guys are sort of in that vein, and I've done some work with game companies, and they've all looked at Korea for that kind of stuff. Is that something that you think is making Korea more interesting, or do you think that it's more just a trend, and there's other interesting things about Korea that could be innovative and things that we should look at?
I definitely believe that the cultural exports of Korea, the idea of the Korean wave, is very interesting. I run Soompi.com, which is, of course, an English and other language site for Korean pop culture. The fans are everywhere, and it also helps improve the image globally. We work with the Korea Tourism Organization. It makes it more interesting. It's an important progression to make, because there were a lot of exports, say, from Hong Kong or Japan before this,
right.
Anime and so forth, for Korea to establish itself as a powerhouse globally. An understanding of the way the culture works, why it's unique, and the respect for it is very important for people to want to work in Korea or work with Korean companies. And that's the same for Japan. A lot of people understood, okay, here's J-pop, here's anime, okay, it's interesting, it's unique. And I think Korea has made great strides in that. 200 million views on Psy's new video. I don't know if you guys, in the Gangnam Style, Now There's Gentlemen. That was huge within a couple days. So just having that exposure is going to help a lot.
Yeah, and one final note from my side. With the Accelerator, we take applicants from Korea, but we had 150 or so applicants, and we chose about 10, but out of the 150, maybe 1/3 were from international. So we chose actually 2, one guy from the US and one from Hong Kong, who was part of Y Combinator before. But we're seeing it's global. I think people just want to be in certain countries that have a certain advantage for what they're doing, whether it's mobile or gaming or whatever. And it happens that people identify that with that kind of business, and it's becoming less of a barrier, and I think easier for foreigners to do business there, as well as coming this way, which I didn't really talk about. Now coming back, is there sort of culture shock that you have, and do you notice big differences in entrepreneurialism on both sides of the ocean?
Coming back, there's not a culture shock. I grew up in this area, but definitely the style of business is different. In Korea, you can make a phone call and you can reach almost anyone very quickly. And they say Silicon Valley is similar. I guess you could go into LinkedIn, and within 1 degree, there's pretty much everyone you need to meet there. But the pace is so different, and the negotiation style is very different. You almost
people call you directly.
Exactly.
There's no emails, or it's fewer.
And then the American conference call system. I don't know why we all live within an hour of each other, and we're always on conference calls, right? And so there's always one person has to mute out on their Bluetooth. It's very different. And it used to be okay. That's the way it's done. Whereas after going to Korea, you value having the face-to-face meeting and that interaction. I don't know if it's better or not. It's just different. That was kind of the big difference for me.
Great. I think at this point we'll open it up to the audience. If you guys have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear. Hopefully we can answer. Yes.
How are the bankruptcy laws different in Korea than they are here?
Actually, I'm not particularly sure about how bankruptcy law works. So I don't
Otherwise,
know.
we would have done that instead of.
Yeah, I think I should have. Yeah, but I remember at the time, this was 2005 when we were considering bankruptcy, that it was very similar because most of the Korean system is modeled after the U.S. one. So I think the Korean bankruptcy system is about the same, but I'm not an expert by any means. Yeah.
What would you say were the top 2 or 3 challenges Korean startups or SMEs would face when coming to Silicon Valley?
From my perspective?
And yeah, either one of your perspectives.
So a lot of Korean companies have failed here, both large and small. The big ones, of course, when, I don't know if you guys heard of it, but the #1 social network before Facebook was Cyworld in Korea. They built a huge team. They failed to come here. But then there's a lot of smaller startups that failed to come here as well. And then you're like, well, maybe it's because they don't understand Silicon Valley. Well, no, they hired a whole bunch of people from here, right? So it's not because of that. It's just different. It's the same reason why for a long time a lot of companies couldn't get into Korea. Culturally, it's just different, and you have to understand that when there's a difference in culture, you have to take the strengths and remove the weaknesses. A lot of people don't do that; they just copy it, and that's where it was weak. One of the, just like David was talking about, Ticketmonster versus Groupon. Very recently, when Groupon tried to enter Korea, there was a smaller company by a Korean American that's called Ticketmonster, and they became #1, even though Groupon poured a bunch of money, offered to buy them, because they approached it differently, and they were able to be flexible. Now, on the way back here, the companies that are in Korea trying to enter the US market, they are almost always trying to clone another US idea and saying we can do it cheaper. It's not really a good proposition. So that's very common mistakes. If you're going to do it, you have to really commit to the market you're in, and I still feel that a lot of Korean companies don't think of it that way. They just think of
I think the answer a little bit on your question. I think
Coming from Korea to here, I mean,
one is culture, obviously language. They're not used to being out of their element. It's very homogeneous in Korea, obviously. And unless they've traveled before or they studied abroad, it's a big culture shock for them. And in fact, there's one guy that I met, it was at GSB here, and he founded a company called Vicky. And he didn't speak much English, but he was stubborn and determined, like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get to know people here. So he survived and went back to Korea eventually, and then his company got big money from Andreessen, and he's doing pretty well. So it's pretty rare for barely English-speaking CEO. But then there's other companies that sort of failed immediately, like Cyworld, couldn't localize. I think a lot of it has to do with a culture and their mindset, and then also the network. Like, they don't know investors, they don't know partners over here. In fact, the main question I get from folks from Korea is, how do I meet Sequoia? How do I meet this angel investor? How do I make a partnership with Google? And even if I introduce them, there's no conversation going on there, and there's no follow-up because there's just a wall of differences, right, and culture shock. So, and for the VCs too, those guys are used to seeing this sort of top-notch level entrepreneur that's based here. And so it's on both sides. So in many cases, we have to broker that, and that's sort of what I do. But definitely, I think those are the two main reasons.
I have a Korean friend who's staying with us right now who's a surgeon and who's doing a rotation at Stanford, and we've been talking a lot about differences in culture, and it's very clear to me, but I'm curious to hear from you, what lessons could American founders and American startups learn from Korean founders and startups? Because I find that every single tech hub around the world, some kind of innate advantage they have because of what they contend with in their culture in their area.
my perspective, after being in Korea for a long time and still running a startup there, Koreans have, like I said, that frantic working style is very powerful. I mean, it's when they say here that iteration is very important, it's like built into the way Koreans are. I mean, they're constantly iterating the way they're working. And the other thing is the way the relationships are built. It's so much, I think it's probably born out of the homogenous culture, but it's very powerful to get ideas or to work with people. Your network is really fast. When we're recruiting, it's I know people, and then bam, we're able to grow very quickly and get really good talent. And people say the risk taking isn't there, and so kind of the last thing is that there is some risk taking, because if you know someone who's doing a startup, you can get them in and join you without like all the incentives and so forth. They're willing to take that jump. And for me and the teams that I've worked with, we continue working with each other, and we continue to get more people to take jumps with us. I think that's very powerful.
I think, in short, like the affinity that goes on, because when I'm there, I mean, obviously I'm Korean American, but they identify me with when I'm as a Korean when I'm there. You're just included, and when I bring others, whether they're Korean or not from the U.S. in that group, they're included. So they go to lunch together, they go drinking together, and you build this like human bond that's very, very, very strong. And I notice, in other cultures, or maybe even in the States, you work and then you go home to your family, and you kind of separate work from your life. But there, it's very sort of intertwined, and it consumes everything. Your whole lifestyle is consumed with your group at work. In fact, most of the companies there at 12 o'clock, they'll shut the lights off and the AC because everyone's going to lunch. And so you can't just sit there. I'll be sitting in a cube, and then it's dark, and you have to find my way out. But it's because they want everyone to go at a certain time and be together, and it's just mobs of people. So I think that forces you to just be interconnected, and that in turn kind of helps you become more motivated in some ways, I think, and not feel like you're left out or you're like a loner or something like that. So I think that's
the fact that the group doesn't go together to lunch at the same time here felt like
right.
you're being not included.
Or one person paying for everybody versus Dutch here. It's more common to do that. Small things.
What effect is North Korea having on South Korean business and entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, I remember like that every couple months there'd be bomb drills and so forth. The most obvious aspect, like I said, is that they have to keep a standing military, and that 2-year requirement is huge. They give exemptions. So for the high-tech industry, they try to let, not entrepreneurs, but engineers not have to go to the military and only do 1 month and serve those 2 years as kind of cheap labor for startups. And that's worked a lot to a degree because you don't lose 2 years of your prime. And actually a lot of engineers in our company, in my last 2 companies, actually went through those kind of programs and got exemptions. But the broader aspect is that you're delaying the workforce reaching productivity for 2 years, and that's obviously the big difference.
I was just there like last week for about two and a half weeks prior when all the news was going on, and you don't really hear about it there so much at all. People are so used to, it's from Palo Alto to San Francisco. It's about that distance from Seoul to the border. So it's very unconscious in your mind. I think as I was trying to bring in some guys for business meetings from the States, but they didn't want to come because of what was going on. They wanted to wait and see. But I think definitely inside of Korea there's less anxiety, and people just are they're more concerned about the weather, frankly, than they are about nukes or North Korea.
You guys had talked about this briefly before we had started the program in terms of the emergence of accelerators is still something that's quite new in Korea, and how that's maybe would have played out very differently for you, Sherman, if we did have accelerators in Korea probably 10 plus years ago, as opposed to something that's really just emerging in the last year. So maybe want to talk a little bit more about that and share some thoughts.
I'll speak really briefly before David takes this away. I'll just say that I would much rather have taken money from David when starting these companies than where
Sure.
we did get our money. Well, I don't know. But no, actually, Kstartup and this new wave of incubators and money is very important. And I kind of want to see what your ideas are, what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect storm right now because Korea is a lot more open than before. The government's pushing startup companies. You have a lot of entrepreneurs there that are from, they've been schooled all over, or they worked in different companies. Like if we had a profile of all the entrepreneurs that came to our last program, and they're from, schools in the States, schools in China, and all over, and worked at all different kinds of, Apple. And it's a diverse pool now. So it's not just local, but I think we're trying to get more deeper into the local networks of folks who are just wanting to work in that safe job at Samsung or LG and find that talent. But I still think the mindset is still, it has some peeling of the onion to go. But now more corporates and other sponsors besides the government are now interested in putting money into these, even investors. So Sequoia, I talked to them a few months ago, and they're like, we love what's going on in the mobile messaging area, because they invested in WhatsApp, and you look at, I don't know if you heard of KakaoTalk, that's like the #1 messaging app in Korea. There's Line, which is NHN's, but those are driving social networking in Asia now. It's not so much Facebook. People are leaving and they're doing more sort of one-to-one with a very smaller network, and they're playing games on it. So with that phenomenon there, definitely it's fueling more entrepreneurs to get more excited about doing a startup because there's less barriers to entry in Korea. But I think government, private investors, guys who've made money in tech, international companies coming in, is fueling this kind of fear of accelerators that are happening. So there's more money there, and obviously more talented people who can help vet or curate these programs, getting involved, because there's some upside that they can see or some benefit to getting involved there and more excitement, frankly. So That's kind of what I'm seeing in the last year or two. But government's still excited, but kind of everyone's working in unison. So I think that's what's making a lot of noise with the accelerators.
Actually, I have one question for you, David. And what I'm interested in understanding from your perspective is, where do you see the exit market developing in Korea? Because it's very different from here. You know,
Oh, yeah.
the windows for exiting in Silicon Valley are very different from Korea, and over time it has changed a lot as well. Like an exit, like what we did with Korea Telecom. I mean, Korea Telecom never really bought companies like ours before, at that valuation especially. So I kind of want to see, like, with your investments at the early stage, you know, why have you concentrated on that, and where do you see your companies going towards?
Well, we see huge, obviously, we call it sort of the dark ages right now, where people are needing to learn how to do a startup and go through all that sort of iterations of that, kind of like here, but 10 years ago. And now there's this huge learning curve. People are getting it, but someone's got to pay for that sort of dark age period, which is these incubators, the government, which is great. People are learning about it. But I think the real money that's going to be there, meaning from M&A or from investment, is starting to come in slowly, because they're seeing these exits, whether it's your company as a reference. People talk about your company as well as Ticketmonster as being, hey, these are the best case scenarios, and sort of looking at the sectors that they're in. And I think that the way that we look at accelerators right now is really more of just learning, but finding the sort of gems within the portfolio that will succeed, whether it's in Korea or going abroad. Even with Y Combinator, I mean, if you look at the hit rate, it's still pretty low. I mean, you could probably count on two hands in the past couple of batches how many have actually exited or getting further financing. So, but I think that's sort of the nature of accelerators. It's that people will take something from it, or they'll meet other founders and start a new company, and some will create the next Airbnb or Dropbox. But in Korea, I think they're still coming up with their own innovations, and through time, and they're become serial entrepreneurs. But I think in the next couple of years, we'll see bigger and better things happening. Again, it's a small country with a small sort of number of people compared to elsewhere, but it's becoming more global, which is what I think is interesting. But in order to do that, they have to meet others that are abroad and learn the markets. Yeah.
Wondering if you guys have any thoughts on maybe comparing, the recent success of Samsung and LG compared to kind of the declining dominance of electronics companies in Japan. Are there any particular maybe qualities from Korean, entrepreneurship or business culture that you think are really giving them lots of strengths right now in this time we're in?
I'll answer quickly first. Speculating on why Samsung is successful, it's so many different moving factors, right? I mean, they made the right investments. So I wouldn't say it's something like, okay, there's a specific cultural, thing that makes them more successful. And again, we don't know how this is going to play out over the next 20 years. IT moves very quickly. And the one interesting thing is, there was an article, I believe is the Times or Wall Street Journal, about the founder of Samsung and the idea that they're paranoid. And I think that is the one thing I see that works really well. There's always going to be something different. My phone is the Galaxy Note, which everyone tells me is ridiculous looking. And they're going to make a bigger one. And there's never going to stop. And I think that's one thing that will serve well. We don't know if the investments are going to be right, but never thinking that this is the best thing ever. That's the one quality I think at Samsung, LG, or the Korean companies that will really help them succeed in the future.
Yeah, I think part of it is also there's a little chip on their shoulders, about these other companies. They always feel like we have to compete and we have to, but when you look inside the company, like I've met a lot of guys at Samsung, is that they think very globally. In fact, they've hired like their top president and a bunch of EVPs. They've all studied abroad, and they're all from overseas to some degree. And that's very rare for a Korean chaebol company. Usually it's all family, like LG, it's all family, and I think it sort of stunts the growth of a company. That's the typical chaebol companies, like cousins are running it. But the fact that they've embraced outsiders and outside management, I think has really helped a lot to make it a better company.
And you look at like the Samsung, LG groups, and there's like not a single Korean person there. They've all got local people promoting them and understanding them. So I agree.
Exactly. Even in Palo Alto, I don't know if you heard that they have two big innovation centers coming in. One on University, where the old Borders is. Another one on Sand Hill. That's going to be more focused on semiconductors and that kind of thing. So they're really making, they're throwing a lot of money at the market, and hopefully we'll see what happens, for better or for worse. Yeah.
Actually, I am originally from South Korea, but I'm asking you because I have less knowledge about startup things. So, because of the kind of dinosaur companies like Samsung and LG in South Korea, so do you have something in mind should avoid some, another question is, so should we avoid certain kind of business models or business regions in South Korea because of the competitions between the startup company and the Jabber or dinosaur companies? Actually, Samsung and LG are covering a lot of manufacturing and services nowadays. So my question is, so do you have some kind of, should we avoid certain business regions we shouldn't touch?
I wouldn't build a phone, that's for sure. Just a really quick 2 cents, because a lot of startups do worry about Samsung and LG. Obviously, SK bought Hynix recently, the big semiconductor memory company, because they want to be like Samsung in many ways, right? They want to own that whole ecosystem, because they own the whole, they're the majority telco in Korea. I think there's less fear because you see Samsung stepping up and doing more investments, M&A. I mean, even their incubator in Palo Alto is a little bit controversial because they want to invest in companies, but sort of right of first refusal be given to Samsung, so down the road they can buy them. But I don't know who's going to buy that, right? They might not like that. But I think they're getting better at, hey, let's just fund companies, and if they do great, well, that's great. Learn from them. And at the same time, they're stepping up and doing more. There's a couple of acquisitions like last year that they've done, but again, it's very rare. And even with KT, that's super rare. So I think they're starting to open their minds up a bit more, and hopefully that won't affect startups not to want to do something in the same space. But they're moving not only in the hardware but software media side. That's also growing. So, I think anyone can be a target if you're in Korea because you need those partners to succeed to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of thought line, but what I believe a startup should avoid is not a specific industry or something. They should just avoid getting in a contract that makes them just a shop for Samsung or a shop for LG.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, it happens a lot, and that's really the biggest thing to avoid. For us, we're actually, Samsung and LG have a very good long tradition of investing in companies. That's how it happens, right? For their partners. But my company actually, and I can't tell you the details, but we do work with Samsung in a very long-term relationship in multiple areas, and we don't have an investment from them. So it means that they're starting to be looking at that. But to date, most of the time, they'll invest in a company before they partner with them. But it's changing. So I wouldn't be as worried about that. It's, in fact, an advantage.